Well, I didn't want to have a PowerPoint, and I usually do, but I just said that I'm going to make this kind of like a dialogue because it's kind of nap time for some people, and I wanted to wake people up. So the topic of what I'm going to be speaking today is called Women's Health, Energy, and Human Rights. It's a missing link, because I really think it's a missing link. And just to add on to what, Corinne, you were talking that there are about 3 billion people without who use solid fuels. But this is even scarier. Over 1.6 million children die every year because they face indoor pollution. And most of the indoor pollution is because they're with their moms when they're cooking. And this is in rural areas. And because this is the CSW 56, which is the focus on rural women, so I decided to kind of make the main focus of my talk on rural women and children. And the other biggest challenge is when we're talking about all these stoves. I mean, David, it would be great if we got a grant to put one of these stoves in, the rural communities where it really matters. Because they what are called these respiratory particles, and when they go over a certain extent, they start being deposited in our lungs. And children, especially newborns, do not have a protective reflex as much as we do. So sometimes if they're premature, they can't even cough it up. So they really start life at a major disability because of these issues. So that's why it's like a 3D puzzle, because you have the MDG3, what you talked about, Marcia, MDG2, which is promoting universal education. And when these girls are going to get firewood or water, they're pulled out of school. And then it's increased infant mortality, which is MDG4, and maternal mortality. And I just want to focus a little bit about this woman in Kenya who was 8 months pregnant, and she was cooking on what is called a kerosene stove there, and it's called a korobi, and then her skirt caught fire. She was badly burnt. And it took them 5 hours, because she lived in a rural area, to get to a hospital. She had over 70% of burns. And let me tell you, I know it's not polite lunchtime conversation, but it doesn't matter, because we're not here to be polite. We're here to learn about the facts. And her child was born prematurely. She couldn't nurse the baby. There were no incubators. The child died. And she had over 70% burns. And let me tell you, burns is for anywhere you need specialized nursing. Well, she didn't have it, and ultimately she became lame because of all the contractures. Her husband threw her out of the house. She had to go live with her mother and father, and when they died, she had to resort to prostitution. So what I'm trying to say is all this boils down to not having something like that. And the other thing I can tell you, many years ago when I was working in the emergency department in Saudi Arabia, a little kid, Marsha, I'm borrowing this, I'm giving it back to her, so I have many witnesses in this room, because kerosene is transparent. It looks like water. This kid was brought into the emergency room having thought this was water because it was stored in a disposable plastic bottle. So that is another issue we have. So when we're talking about these different kind of fuels, we need to see and again, most of the world does not have the luxury of putting on a microwave or a range, and they don't even have piped gas. It's very few places. When I go to visit India, it's only the modern houses which have the piped gas, but the others, they have cylinders, so you hear of explosions. So again, that all ties into women's safety. And another biggest challenge we have here is when you're talking about rural women, there's no cross ventilation. I mean, suppose there were another 40 people in this room and somebody had the flu. I mean, there's a big chance that in addition to us sitting of 40 more, that we would end up with that because of the particles being distributed. But we are in this for only a small period of time, and we go oh my God, we are happy to be out. We don't feel choked. Sometimes you feel that in an elevator. Now, what happens to these children who are exposed to these fumes. That's why you have an increased incidence of asthma, you have an increased incidence of COPD, and there have been studies done in China where they found an increased incidence of lung cancer in women who were bending over these stoves. Again, they're rural women bending over cooking on coal stoves. Now you had that picture where you had the charcoal, so they're bending over these stoves. So again, it's almost comparable to a smoker. So the double whammy is a kid who is exposed to these fumes at home and is exposed to secondhand smoke from his dad or mom or both. So again, this is a big problem we are facing. The other challenge I want to talk about is when I was in India a couple of years ago and went to one of the NGOs, they said that so many women, as you talked about, carrying water, firewood, and they were carrying their children. And one of the children died, infants, because there was something from the dried grass they had on their head, like a scorpion which stung the baby. So again, what I'm trying to do is paint this picture of how not only is it a hazard for one person, but the whole community. So this is something we need to be really thinking about. And the other biggest challenge we have is the cultural barriers, because a lot of people say that, oh, my grandmother used cow dung. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen cow dung. I'm sure Corinne has, and, you know, Ginger, David, and George has. So the problem is they all use this cow dung and plaster it on walls so that it dries. Now, they're not using gloves. Do you think they have, like, you know, gloves or some kind of protective clothing? They don't. So again, they're getting a lot of infections. That is another biggest problem, is when they're using this, because cow dung is a perfect medium before it's dry for bacterial proliferation. So you can have a lot of streptococcus infections, staph infections in turn. So again, you see, if we provide clean energy or safe cooking stoves, we are really addressing the basic need of health, and we are really trying to improve the health of communities. Now, one of the other biggest challenges, when you were talking about women farmers, it really surprised me that even the men don't take them seriously, the men in their family. And a lot of time, they are the ones who are doing the unsafe work, which even sometimes means chopping down the wood. So you have, again, a lot of amputations, and they do not have prosthetics. And the other thing, in places like excuse me, Korea, and also other places where they're going to get, or places like Afghanistan where there are so many landmines, which we all know, they're going to gather firewood. Now, children or women, if you have you know, the landmine, it doesn't know if it's a soldier's foot or it's a woman's foot or a child's foot. So they are maimed. And then they don't even have the necessary services to go for prosthetics, and even if you get prosthetics, they have to be replaced every 5 years. And I can sympathize because I'm kind of hobbling around with a sprain. I just got out of my camp boot to a brace and an elastic bandage, and I'm thinking, like, I'm lucky I live here. What about people? And it's even worse when you lose a limb. So what I'm trying to say is, when we look at this and when we look at the solutions for this problem, we don't have to say, oh, Marsha's dealing with sustainability, David's dealing with cook stoves, and Corinne is also dealing with cook stoves, and Minnie's looking at health. But we need to have, like, bring these all together and kind of think about having a common approach and also a common solution. And how long do I have? Timekeeper?
Minute and a half.
Okay, just to wrap up so that we can have Q&A. The other biggest challenge is, I think, is when we are going to these countries, we need to be aware of their socioeconomic status and the culture. Because I know in a lot of places I have visited that even though they have the money, they don't understand that you can improve by using that. So what one of the projects, one of the NGOs I'm working with has focused on is talking to, you have the community health workers from the villages, going and talking to them. If you use this, it's better for you, it's better for your children, and do like a little cost, benefit analysis, like your kids can go to school. So that is the key thing, and saying that it will help your kids even be healthier because they're not exposed to this. And the worst thing is it's the children and the women who suffer because they can't run out. And usually it's in a rural area, it's you're cooking in the same place, you're sleeping in the same place. And the last thing I wanted to say is before I stop is you were talking about barbecue, so that's why this thing, it struck me that the nail place I go to where I live up in LaGrange in Dutchess, a very nice Vietnamese people, when we had the trick-or-treat storm during Halloween, remember, on October 31st, because that was really a trick. So what happened was there was no power, so this Stephanie, who runs the nail place, her mother and sister went back to the house, and they used a charcoal heater in the room. They didn't open the windows. This happened on October 31st, and the mother died because she was asphyxiated. So again, what I'm trying to say is they didn't realize they wanted the heat. A lot of times this is what is happening. They're not only using these for cooking, but they're also using this for heat. And then lo and behold, you could drop dead because the carbon monoxide is a deadly killer. And because there was no power or something, even the carbon monoxide monitor didn't go off. So I just wanted to say that it's not only there, even here we are so vulnerable to this. And thank you so much. And I think I wrapped up on time. Thanks for your time.